What's up, gamers? Back for another leftovers video. This is a desert cube I've been working on here on YouTube. I'm only allowed to edit the Cube Cobra page while I am recording here for you all. This is the third video about the leftovers. If you didn't see the first one, definitely check that one out. I introduced the concept. This is going to be an 8-player desert cube, so you have to draft all the lands you play. There's no land box here. And in that first video, I did announce that this cube is going to be kind of built around. It's going to have a Bazaar of Baghdad and a Mishra's Workshop and a non-powered cube. So a really weird space. Two cards that do involve kind of designing around them, both giving you enough infrastructure to use them and also trying to make it so that they are not just totally broken power outliers. So got my work cut out for me there. Definitely check out the first video if you haven't seen that, if you want to know what's going on in the cube here. Second video was kind of around how I'm managing Mishra's Workshop in the cube. And so now I'm going to talk about Bazaar of Baghdad and Dredge. How are we playing in the graveyard when it comes to leftovers? So when it comes to Bazaar of Baghdad, when it comes to Dredge style decks, you kind of need three things, or you're looking for three things. You want cards that can fill up your graveyard, and there's kind of two things happening there. You want to either discard cards from your hand or to put cards from your deck into your graveyard. So kind of the two easy ways to fill up your graveyard. And then you want cards that care about existing in your graveyard or cards that care about other things existing in your graveyard. And you need ways to renew all of these resources. So Bazaar of Baghdad does fortunately check a lot of boxes for these decks. It's very powerful. You can still play 4 in Vintage, but it's kind of the only place the card is really allowed to see play. It does show up on and off, sometimes in powered cubes. It does have a lot of specific stuff happening with it that makes it hard to just throw it into any cube. But when you do cube with it, you want to make sure you reinforce all the things that a Bazaar of Baghdad wants you to do, all the things that you want to have in a Dredge deck. So I'm doing a lot of stuff that does come from historic constructed decks playing in the space. So kind of starting with some stuff that puts cards from your deck into your graveyard. Hermit Druid, this is a classic one. This card is banned in Legacy. This card can mill your entire deck. If you have no basic lands in your deck, Hermit Druid is just 1 green tap, reveal your deck, put it in your graveyard. I don't know how much that aspect of the card is going to come up here. I had this card on and off in Spooky Cube for many years, and there's like a lot of fair graveyard stuff happening there. And this card is fine if you're doing a fair graveyard. If you're like flashing back a spell, maybe you have a small number of sticky creatures, and specifically when you have a bunch of basic lands, you're going to stop just kind of randomly when you're milling with Hermit Druid. There is really broken combo space you can get into. I think Hermit Druid in this cube is kind of just like another reinforcer for all the Dredge cards. So in my first video, I did reveal this cube's going to have Golgari Grave Troll, Stinkweed Imp, Light from the Loam, Golgari Thug, and Dakmor Salvage, just kind of like the classic dredgers. So Hermit Druid just kind of adds some more stuff in that space. Can help you make sure you're hitting your land drops. I mean, you can play Hermit Druid in like an ostensibly normal deck. It does generate card advantage. If you have a bunch of basics, you can just keep hitting your land drops with the Hermit Druid. But this is going in here to be something that does reinforce the Dredge space. It's very fragile, but it is very good at filling up the graveyard. And we'll see exactly how combo-y the cube ends up, but Hermit Druid is something that will enable like full-on graveyard combo stuff, depending how far that I want to push this. Buried Alive, another classic one. The Odyssey prints actually are a reprint. Cards first printed in Weatherlight. I like both printing as they both have the old card frame, and Buried Alive and Odyssey was my first introduction to the card. Also the same set that Entomb was released. I do want some strong stuff to put cards into your graveyard. When it comes to Dredge, these cards will go find your Dredger, dump them in the graveyard. The Buried Alive can go find multiple Dredgers, fill up your graveyard that way. There's going to be a little bit in the Reanimator space, but something I've been talking about is kind of gating how strong of a thing you can reanimate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stuff to reanimate in this cube and ways to do that today, but it's all going to be kind of older cards that you realistically would not be reanimating today. I've talked about how Woodfall Primus is kind of the big reanimator target I'm going to have in this cube, and that one can still hang in Vintage Cube. It's not currently in my vintage cube. It's kind of why I wanted to put it here, but that's kind of like the ceiling I'm looking at. And then stuff in the space of like Platinum Angel is something that I thought was kind of cool. But Buried Alive and Tomb, these are really powerful enablers. And something I actually was like on the fence about when I started working on this project. I wasn't sure if I wanted anything that could like search your deck and shuffle. The Mirage fetch lands were definitely something that made me sympathetic to having some amount of searching and shuffling. And I think like Entomb in a world where you don't have Demonic Tutor, where you don't have Reanimate, Animate Dead, like nothing that you can really do on turn 1 or 2 with it to fully just like put a giant creature onto the battlefield, is something that I'm more interested in. And the Reanimator stuff has all been cut from my vintage cube. So the Entomb is going to go somewhere. I think also with Entomb recently banned from Legacy. Yeah, kind of a theme today, I guess. The Hermit Druid and the Entomb. Cards that don't have a home in other places. I mean, I know that Entomb is still like really good in the larger vintage cubes. You could play on the digital vintage cubes, powered cubes. Entomb is clearly still a very powerful card, but it's going to take on a fairly different texture here. And I want more stuff in the self mill space. Hedron Crab's an awesome card. Part of why I want to have Hedron Crab here. It's one of my favorite cards to play with Vengevine. I did say in my first video I'm going to have Hollow One, Vengevine, the 2 Root Wallas. So that's kind of like the ideal opening hand for a Bazaar deck is Bazaar, tap it, discard Vengevine and like a Root Walla, and then cast Hollow One. But that's so unlikely. A, one player gets all that. B, that's your opening hand. You need other stuff to round out a full deck. And ideally, I want this stuff to be contested by multiple players, which means you want kind of a higher volume going on. Hedron Crab is funny because if your opponent is aggressively dredging, you could use this to mill them, but then Hedron Crab in your own deck, where you just mill yourself, and Hedron Crab as a creature towards recurring Vengevine is really nice. I also have already talked about Fast Spawn and Bounce Lands being in this cube, so there is just a mill your opponent combo there. I'm not sure how much I want to explore milling your opponent. That's like something. I love Hedron Crab. I hate Ruin Crab. Like, only milling your opponent is not necessarily something that I want to feature here. But when I have some stuff that can mill your opponent, that is appealing in the self mill space, I think there's going to be an opportunity to explore a deck that is decent at milling your opponent that's like otherwise good at playing Magic. Like, I know for a fact that sometimes the dredge decks, like if you have Hedron Crab, you're going to be in a position where targeting your opponent is just the line that like just happens when you play Hedron Crab in dredge, or when you would have done that years ago when that was a part of constructed formats with dredge cards. So yeah, that's something I'm thinking about. Generally, though, you're going to be looking more at cards like Citrus Supplier that just mill yourself. I don't think I'm going to put Gravecrawler in this cube. That's just a card that really easily goes into any graveyard space. And it's getting more into like you have to be attacking and blocking. And I don't know. It opens up some cool space with sacrifice outlets. And Citrus Supplier is a card that wants you to be able to sacrifice your creatures so you can get this die trigger kind of on demand. I may or may not add Gravecrawler. I think that this is a cube where there's going to be an emphasis on working harder for a lot of what's going on. I'm giving you Bazaar of Baghdad. I can't just give everything away for free. Gravecrawler also like super parasitic and caring about graveyards and zombie space. It is very meaningful in your Vengevine deck, but I also think that Vengevine is kind of like a power outlier. That turn one Vengevine with Bazaar hand is like on the extreme side for what I want to enable. So I think Citrus Supplier is just kind of like more of an innocuous card that you put in your self mill deck. But if I go down the Gravecrawler route, then it starts becoming like really obvious. And yeah, I'm not necessarily into that. I kind of want Citrus Supplier maybe will show up if you're trying to do like Yawgmoth's Will combo in this context, and some other graveyard stuff. There's a good Threshold enabler. Maybe I have some Threshold cards that Citrus Supplier is just going to play well with. Plays, with anything that plays out of the graveyard. So definitely going to fill out that space as I add more cards here. Discard Outlet's going to be pretty nice for any dredge deck. So this is just 3 removal spells here. I do want to have some Planeswalkers in the cube, so Bone Shards is very appealing. You can discard your Dredger there. destroying planeswalkers. Once you have planeswalkers, even a small number, I really value having removal spells for them. And like Collective Brutality is going to be good against the combo decks, solid against aggressive decks. Sometimes the life gain matters against red decks too. Lightning Axe is a pretty cool discard outlet. It gives red like a cheap answer to creatures with a lot of toughness. It does push back against some of the strong cards I have in the cube or like strong setups. I talked about on my last video about Kodaltha Forge Masters, like Axe being an answer to a 3/5 is kind of reasonable there. And like the Forge Master is a card that can kind of get all of the strongest card from the artifact deck onto the table. So a little bit of push and pull, having some interaction for that stuff is good. I also have some cool stuff to do proactively with Lightning Axe. Starting here today, just as a discard outlet for your Dredge deck. And this is a way that having the discard outlets in more colors does allow the Dredge deck to kind of hit multiple seats. Like different colors going to be interested in graveyard stuff, so the Lightning Axe can really play with like Reanimator. Versions of combo decks will play this just because it's an efficient removal. So something appealing there, and like the more colors you put Dredge into, the more likely multiple seats will be interested in the Dredge cards. Notably, white is really bad in the graveyard, and this has been true so far, and it's still true today. I have not yet talked about any white cards going into the cube, but there are going to be white cards in the cube. This cube is not color restricted. It just so happens that Bazaar of Baghdad doesn't play well with a lot of white cards. Mishra's Workshop does open up some more going on with white, but my last video was kind of a focus on colorless stuff. But yeah, Lightning Axe, great in red for graveyard. And then just like discard outlets, kind of a really nice one that used to be played in Extended Dredge, Drowned Rusalka. I think a lot of folks probably haven't seen this one before. But it's cool because it's a blue rummaging effect. So you pay a blue, sack a creature, discard a card, then draw. So that discard first, that matters for dredgers because you discard a dredger from your hand and you can immediately dredge it with this ability. Like even though the Rusalka is the reason that Stinkweed is in your graveyard, resolving the draw card ability will allow you to immediately dredge it. And then this is a sacrifice outlet that's going to matter for some other stuff coming up here. This card looks kind of weak, and it is kind of weak, but it's really charming and it really works in the space. So I love Drowned Rusalka. That was a really cool part of the old extended Dredge decks. Not the original Dredge decks, but Dredge kind of held on through a rotation or two in extended, and Drowned Rusalka was a part of a cool package there. Some classic discard outlets, Suna's Prowler, Putrid Imp, so they'll play with like, if you get some reanimation spells, when we talk about a couple reanimation spells today and kind of the texture of those that I want here, of course they discard dredgers. And are just creatures, and we're talking a little bit more about ways that just creatures that attack are going to be significant in here in another package video. Psychotog, awesome in a dredge deck. You just give yourself all the fuel to make Psychotog massive. Like it becomes a must-block creature very quickly. You just dredge, fill up your graveyard, so that remove cards from your graveyard ability makes the Psychotog massive. Also, just discard your dredgers. So classic, awesome graveyard matters card there. Zombie Infestation plays kind of awful, but it plays in this space here, and it is another classic like Odyssey card. Odyssey block really inspired a lot of what's going on in my Spooky Cube, so I have a lot of nostalgia for Odyssey block. I started playing during Onslaught. Odyssey was the block before that, and so these are the cards that I would see a lot when I first started playing. And Zombie Infestation really plays, like, if you have cards that you want to put in a Bazaar of Baghdad deck, then they're going to play with Zombie Infestation too. There's going to be some stuff talking about today that really plays with Zombie Infestation. It does kind of like push the game in a very specific direction. Once you make zombies with the infestation, you kind of just want to do that, and that's all that you do. But you know, it's a discard outlet there, plays onto the battlefield, and it is gated by the number of cards in your hand, and I'm not going to have like a ton of ways to generate a lot of card advantage there. So we're going to try a Zombie Infestation, even though it's a card that I have some reservations about the play patterns of this one. Ideas Unbound is another sweet one that did show up in Extended Dredge a bit. A delayed discard trigger. So this is a cool card for just like Storm spell-based combo, which I haven't really talked about much of the storm stuff I'm going to have in the cube here, but that's going to be coming up in a later video. So you immediately draw 3 cards for 2, and then you discard 3 at end of turn. So this is a discard outlet for dredgers. It's drawing multiple times, so if you have multiple dredgers, you can dredge a bunch with Ideas Abound. It's a cool draw spell for a spell-based combo deck. And even though it's card disadvantage, you can just like put this in a deck. And I think in a desert cube, it is also appealing just to have like some looting effects, even if they are a little bit inefficient in terms of card economy, because like sometimes your cards are just not going to be great. You know, you're only allowed 5 cuts here. You draft 45 cards, you're gonna play 40 of them. You don't get basic lands, so sometimes you're gonna play Ideas Unbound because your deck's a little bit awkward, and this is a way to shape up your hand. All right, so now we're taking into the graveyards, like the reanimator stuff. So I'm not doing reanimate. I'm not doing animate dead. I kind of have landed on I want creature reanimate stuff to cost 4 or more mana, and there can be like some hoops to jump through, which we'll get to in a minute here. But Phyrexian Delver, this is just like a sweet card that I wanted to try in the pre-modern Tubert, but there's kind of too much there. It's just efficient and strong, and so Phyrexian Delver, it's like a solid value card, but you put this next to Reanimate, you put this next to Karmic Guide, and it's like, why would I ever play a Phyrexian Delver? Just a 5 mana 3/2 that cast Reanimate, but it's sweet. It's another old frame card. It's another one that if you're like heavy on graveyard, then this is going to be, you know, the way that you get stuff back. This is going to be one of your reanimate spells. And this is also just like a reasonable value card. You know, if you put this in the same deck as Psychotog, you can use a Psychotog to discard like a Platinum Angel or whatever, a Woodfall Primus, and then reanimate that. Or you can play like a value game where you put the Psychotog out and your opponent like uses some removal on it or whatever. Or it somehow trades in combat. I don't know. Ends up in your graveyard. Like this Phyrexian Delver can be used to bring back a cheaper creature too, is what I'm getting at. Which you do sometimes because of the cost of the life there. So, sweet card, kind of modest in the reanimator space, which is a little bit of what I'm going for here. Living Death is less modest. You know, I've mentioned how I'm going to have like some spell-based combos, some storm stuff. Living Death is more like a big payoff for filling your graveyard. And I think that dredging and just high velocity churning through your deck, it is something that is difficult to really make in cube. Definitely if you are a singleton cube, because there's issues with the order of cards in your deck. When you're dredging, you're not drawing. You are getting the dredger back to your hand, which they generally are like fine to bad to cast from your hand. Like it's not really exciting to get back Stingweed up and cast it. Like sometimes Golgari Gravetroll gets pretty big, but in general, like your draw steps are just not that exciting. So it is pretty meaningful for a dredge deck to like have some kind of big payoff. So this is a sweeper that can bring everything back. This is a card that it's something I've tried in a few different cube environments, and it's like either backbreaking for your opponent because it's a sweeper and you fill up your field, or it is just uncastable for you because for whatever reason their graveyard is stronger than yours. So Living Death can be really tough to make work, but this is going to be a cube that really pushes the self-mill sides of things. And also, I think I'm going to do interaction points as my next video here. So that's going to show off the fact that this is a cube that's going to have some graveyard hate, which I don't generally love doing when I'm playing in the graveyard space for cubes. I want people to be able to use the graveyard and do cool things instead of like inviting them to play a graveyard cube and then them just getting housed by scavenging ooze. Like that experience is very unfun. But this is a cube that's going to have a little bit higher volume of modest graveyard hate, which does make Living Death a card that plays a little bit better. It's also just like a sweet old frame card. This art is awesome. So I'm going to give Living Death a try here. And I want to have some of that old school Magic feeling of like your opponent puts like some decently expensive spell on the stack and it just radically alters the texture of the game. So Living Death, some pretty cool stuff there. And then this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about more expensive reanimator spells. Unburial Rites, Dread Return. Um, 4 mana for Zombify, that's very honest. 5 mana is even more. Oh, I guess that Unbury Rights is kind of a white card. I guess we have an honorary white card here with the white flashback. And then what's meaningful with these cards is that they do play out of the graveyard. If you can get some creatures into play, then this does kind of help with that dredge problem, where if you're dredging every turn, you can't draw the spells in your deck. You need to access them from the graveyard. So flashback's a good way around that, and having reanimator spells that do just play out of the graveyard is a good way to make it so the reanimator deck can like play games. So these I think are pretty important for making that deck work, especially if you're going to be playing multiple turns and not just trying to set up like really busted opening hands and mulliganing to that. Like these are cards you can put into your deck and more reliably play a turn over turn game with dredgers. And speaking of turn over turn games, Oversold Cemetery, cool value card. Don't really know if it's strong enough. Like it doesn't necessarily fit into a dredge deck because like your dredgers already come back, but this is a card that does give you more access to just creatures that you put into your deck. And like I mentioned with Dredge, meaning that you are skipping some draw steps, it's like harder to find the spells in your deck. Oversold Cemetery is a good way to get access to some of those cards over the course of the game. And I have some more stuff in this space. The Oversold Cemetery is pretty modest relative to some of the other stuff. I mean, I think that even relative to like Dread Return, this card is doing something much more honest, and it is a little bit reliant on playing around it a little bit. Really similar to the card Genesis. Genesis is a card that I have in the pre-modern cube, and it's just actually strong. And so I don't have Genesis slotted here, and I just had an Oversold Cemetery that I actually don't remember when I got this. This is a card I remember being really cool when I started playing, and it's really honest in the Genesis space, but you can do stuff like play evoke creatures or just fill up your dredge deck with stuff like the Putrid Imp and the Una's Prowler, and like as a floor, this can let you jump block every turn, but then the ceiling's much higher than that, kind of depending on the texture of your deck. And then another just like random, really cool graveyard card is Seasons Past. This was like a really popular deck in Standard that John Finkel actually top aided the Pro Tour with. It was like this green black Seasons Past deck, just this really grindy value kind of thing. And I wanted to open up that space a little bit. That deck was like impossible to play. Like really, Finkel was one of very few human beings that should have ever played it, but it got kind of popular. Like it showed up a lot at PPTQs. I know a lot of people really enjoyed that deck, despite not necessarily having great win percentages with it. But it's a sweet one. Seasons Past also has that line where you put it on the bottom of your library where it resolves. So this is a card that allows you to aggressively mill yourself and keep playing a game. So I have some stuff that's like really loudly, this is a Dredge deck, like classic Dread Return self mill. And then Seasons Past, it does kind of open up space where maybe you'd put a Dredger in a deck that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about it before, whether it be a combo deck or a control deck, like some kind of setup where you mill yourself a bunch and then you want to just cast Seasons Past every turn. So just trying this out as a cool angle, both a thing to do with Dredgers, and then just a different thing to do with dredgers so that multiple seats at the table are more likely to be interested in those cards, so it becomes less parasitic. Really cool thing to reanimate here, Flayer of the Hatebound. This card's from Dark Ascension. This is the Final Fantasy Commander deck printing. So I've been talking about how, the name of the leftovers, it comes from the fact that I had these cards lying around. I did buy a set of the Final Fantasy Commander deck, so I knew that I was going to build a cube in the Final Fantasy VII space. Specifically, I have a ton of nostalgia for Final Fantasy VII. I've played all of the older games, and I haven't really touched the newer games, but I bought all 4 Commander decks. I was like, well, if I'm getting to one, I may as well get them all. And like the Final Fantasy X and 14 deck exist largely untouched, forever occupying space in my box to remind myself not to do that. Not to buy cards that I don't want or need. So periodically, when I'm working on a new cube, I'll just like look through the remaining cards I still have from those decks. 'Cause I have not gotten rid of a single card from any of those 4 decks. They all exist somewhere in my collection, be they in one cube or the other, or be they in a stack still together in that 5-row box I allow myself to have. And it occurred to me to look through that box for some cards for this cube. And Flair the Hatebound is just a really cool one. This is like a combo finish with your Living Death. And it's pretty nice to reanimate even with like a Dread Return. It's just a really nice hit trigger. It's not the best thing to just cast, but it does have Undying, so it's kind of self-contained in being able to undie and do some damage. For 6 mana, you pay for what you get there, but it's a cool thing to do in the graveyard space. Laboratory Maniac, awesome build around for talking about aggressively dredging your whole deck. This is a card you'll put in your Seasons Past deck. I have some more synergies here. I'm not going to do Thassa's Oracle. That card is powerful in a way that doesn't really speak to me. In terms of like just casting it, it also just sucks. It's like a great combo card, but like just casting it sucks. Laboratory Maniac at least sucks all the time. Like, is very forward about what's going on here. This is also the original version of the fact. Really cool. I love Innistrad, so Lab Maniac is just like way cooler than Thassa's Oracle. And then this is going to be a card that really plays in that self-mill space. If I'm talking about having like reanimation cards you play out of your graveyard and talking about really efficient self-mill, then mill your entire deck, flashback on Burial Rites, flashback Dread Return, put Laboratory Maniac onto the battlefield. Like, that's a cool angle for those decks to take. So I both want that to be something that's supported, and I want to try to make this like one of the appealing things for the self-mill decks to do. So I'm also balancing a little bit around like this being the kind of thing you realistically would want to reanimate, which is kind of handled by that's an aspect of having Woodfall Primus as like the ceiling, and like Platinum Angel is an appealing card, right? Is making it so you're more likely to try the Laboratory Maniac plan. And like, I could make this more appealing by putting in Thassa's Oracle, but it plays awful, so I'm not gonna do that. A couple awesome cards for just Bazaar, and these are useful if you are self-milling at all. Squee Goblin the Bob, awesome original frame in the Mercadian Masks, return from your graveyard every turn, Master of Death, the Modern Horizons twist on it. Great when you're discarding cards. It's going to be a bunch of cards that discard for value. I've already gone over a few of them here today. So you kind of like get to use those cards every turn without losing anything with these. Just really strong cards that make Bazaar of Baghdad really hum turn over turn. Anger, awesome card to put in your graveyard. Got some type duels in this cube. This is going to be a really strong thing to have in these self-milling decks. And there's like, I think, going to be versions of red decks. Like if I'm putting in cards like Lightning Axe, that's not going to only show up in Dredge decks. It's going to show up in red aggressive decks sometimes. And so Anger is like a card you can just cast for 4. It's a card that's going to be ways to discard, and it's going to play in the self-mill decks if you just have access to one of those red type duels, or even a basic mountain sometimes. And that's an aspect of Life from the Loam being one of the dredgers, is if you have Anger, you have Life from the Loam, and you have a mountain anywhere in your deck, you can get access to that. And that's going to open you up to doing some stuff. Like, you can't really anger with Living Death without a third thing happening, because the Living Death puts the anger on the battlefield. But you could like discard the anger after the fact, or you could sacrifice the anger with some kind of sacrifice outlet. So there's like some hoops to jump through, some space to explore here. And I think I like that it's not super direct. Like, I have some really powerful stuff that loudly signals, play with Bazaar of Baghdad, play with Mishra's Workshop. But then in terms of the actual packages, having some kind of crunchy, weirder implementations is something that I think is going to be a fun aspect here. Another classic Dread card. I've only ever heard this pronounced Icarid, but actually I was thinking about it because ICHOR, that word is pronounced Iker. And it occurred to me thinking about this, like, is this supposed to be pronounced Icarid? Which I don't like. I hate that, but it might be correct. I don't know. I'm going to call it Icarid, but it's maybe supposed to be Icarid. These are really goofy Graveyard Matters cards. This is another thing that takes advantage of all those fiddly black discard outlets, like the Putrid Imp and the Una's Prowler. black creatures that go to your graveyard that let you Icarid during your upkeep. And then you do sacrifice Icarid at the beginning of your end steps. You kind of keep popping this one out of the graveyard so it can play with other stuff in the graveyard matter space. Any like the Dread return takes advantage of the fact that this creature comes back from the graveyard. You generally don't cast this card for 4. You want to put it into your graveyard some other way and take advantage of a volume of black creatures. It's pretty modest in the space, but very classic Dredge card. So I want to try it out here and try to support it. Bone Miser is like a sweet combo card. This is kind of a riff on the enchantment Waste Not, except it cares about the cards that you discard, whereas Waste Not cares about what your opponent discards. So naturally, like it's harder to build your deck around Waste Not. It's like much easier to build a deck around your own cards. This is going to be a sweet one in terms of the reanimate payoffs in this cube. If you get this card into play, you can start generating tons of value with any of your discard outlets, with Bazaar of Baghdad specifically, making zombies, getting extra mana, drawing cards from anything you discard. And this is, I think, kind of based off of the texture of the creatures I've been putting into this cube, just going to be reasonable to cast here. This is a card that's like a little combo-y, so it didn't end up finding a permanent home in Spooky Cube. So that's why I kind of have a copy that I'm not using. And it seems like it'll be a really powerful like combo finisher in this environment. Bloodghast, classic. Don't really say anything about Bloodghast. Another Life from the Loam card. Bridge from Below is interesting. This card does play really naturally with Icarid because you get your zombies when you sacrifice. The Icarid every turn is a card that you want to put into your graveyard, so self-mill discard outlets. They're going to be awesome here. This card is great with Dread Return because you can make some zombies when other creatures leave the battlefield, so like it helps you maintain zombies. You have stuff to sacrifice to flashback to Dread Return, or when you flash back Dread Return, you get some zombies sacrificing your creatures. So it really plays on the space. One thing about Bridge from Below and Cube that's really challenging, there is just the baseline. It doesn't do anything in play. Like you have to put it into the graveyard. You have to be sacrificing creatures, and then you also kind of need to not be putting creatures into your opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, or like if they just have a creature that has a sacrifice ability, or like they kill their own creature or moves your bridge, that pushes back on bridge a lot. And then a lot of the strength of Bridge from Below and Constructed is like you could have 4 bridges in your graveyard. And so something I've been thinking about is I have not officially committed to this being a fully singleton cube. I think that I'm going to be firm about not having duplicates about like the really strong cards that just play. Like I think it's really tacky to give you 2 lightning bolts or 2 swords to plowshares. Like if it's a card that just plays magic, you should have to prioritize the good version of the card. But if it's a card that's like really out there and really difficult to support, like a second Bridge from Below, both in terms of there being reasons for multiple players to do self-mill and to like be in the dredge space in this cube, and also because this card is not that strong with just the one, like a second, maybe third Bridge from Below is something that I'm thinking about. Yeah, let me know in the comments how you feel about that. Do we want to break singleton for Bridge from Below? I'm kind of sympathetic to it. It's certainly something I'm thinking about. Something that's kind of funny too about Bridge from Below is it doesn't necessarily make sense if you're looking at the cube by color. Like I I'm gonna probably be a little bit loose about color balance in this cube generally, just because it's kind of like a vibes-driven project. But it doesn't really make sense to put this in the black column of your cube. It plays well in black decks. Black decks are going to be where a lot of your self-mill, your discard odds are going to be, but you never cast this card. There's like realistically no reason to do that. So funny aspect there. Do we want to break singleton for Bridge from Below? I'm thinking about it. I think 4 is too many, 3 is possibly too many, but 2 might be just right. Terravor, Odyssey, banger. If you're putting cards into your graveyard, this is one that in theory is going to get pretty big. Give it haste with an anger. Got yourself a stew going there. Funny cube story about Terravor. So, Spooky Cube is a very graveyard driven environment that I've curated for many years. Almost every time that I draft it, I definitely have some friends. My friend Michael is like huge into Terravore. So I always asking, is there any reason you could conceive of playing Terravore? Is Terravore in this cube? How many Terravores are in this cube? Terravore just like kind of attacks and blocks. That's not strong enough for that cube. But at one point, I implemented a BYOT rule: bring your own Terravore. Can't even say it without laughing. But the bring your own Terravore rule was that you were allowed to put any number of Terravores into your cube deck for one of my cubes if you brought a real copy from home. It has to be an Odyssey Terravore. If you bring Odyssey Terravores to cube with me for one of my cubes, you can add as many Terravores to your deck as you want. Weirdly, nobody's taken me up on that. I think it's a pretty modest card, but it's rad. All right, here's another one that is tough because it is awful to draw, but you want this kind of card in your self-mill deck, in your Dread Return deck. Narcomoeba, it's one where initially I didn't pull one aside because like it's so bad, but today, at first I put it in the stack. I was like, I want to try it. I want to make Dredge a thing. Dread Return is a card that I want to make kind of fundamental to the self-mill deck. And Narcomoeba is just like the classic card that does that in constructed. And while I'm thinking about maybe breaking Singleton for Bridge from Below, I think Narcomoeba is exactly the kind of card that I would break Singleton for. And like I think I'd be happy putting 3 Narcomoebas in the cube. Because like you have to draft them, you have to use a pick on them, you have to mill over them, and like you have to put them in your deck. And when you put them in your deck, you risk drawing them, which is pretty bad. And if you have stuff that has to discard as a cost and you got to pay that cost somehow, then yeah, that's going to make up some of the negative aspect of like drawing a Narcomoeba. But I think it's a cool one to break Singleton for, because then it does kind of incentivize you to do more dredging. And this is going to be a card that's going to play really nicely with the Dread Return if you start aggressively dredging and kind of flipping your deck over. And I wouldn't necessarily want to break Singleton for like Bloodghast, because it's just like a strong card. That's a card you're kind of happy to put into your deck if you have like an aggressive slant at all. It's just a strong card. But the stuff that like playing with it is a real cost, and or the Singleton nature is really punishing. Like Bridge from Below kind of sucks only having one. Narcomoeba always sucks, but having more makes it more appealing. So I'm interested in breaking Singleton for Narcomoeba. So again, hit me up in the comments. Do we want to see multiples of Bridge from Below? I'm definitely more sympathetic to Narcomoeba than Bridge from Below. Like sometimes you cast this and chump block or put an equipment on it. Spoilers. But Narcomoeba is one I'm thinking about breaking Singleton for. Crappy narrow cards only. But yeah, thinking about some Singleton breaks. Some more cool stuff. Playing lands from the graveyard, Crucible, Ramunap Excavator, Life from the Loam is like a foundational dredge card. It's going to be an aspect. We've already talked about Academy Ruins being in the cube. So when you have Academy Ruins and maybe you're trying to set up specifically the Mindslaver lock, or just you want to play strong artifacts and have Academy Ruins have access to one or the other, maybe multiples, Dredge is a way to get access to any land in your deck, and Life and Loam plays in that space. There's kind of more stuff that will allow you to self-mill over a value land like Academy Ruins. Or Volrath's Stronghold. So this is the creature version of Academy Ruins, where you can put creatures from your graveyard on top of your library. Another card that famously plays awful, really repetitive play patterns. I don't have like fair plans lined up just yet, but this card is really powerful in like a fair game. If you reset like Shriekmaw, for example, every turn, may or may not get Shriekmaw, Bone Splitter into this cube. I kind of feel like they're strong against decks that aren't strong, so I'm kind of leaning against that. But Volrath's Stronghold, as far as a package with these cards that play lands from your graveyard and or Life from the Loam, so you can set up to Volrath's Stronghold to put Laboratory Maniac on top of your deck every turn. Like if that's what you're doing, I'm sympathetic to your cause. Like, if you want to keep trying putting Laboratory Maniac on top of your deck until it sticks, I think your deck is way cooler than it is strong. To the extent that Volrath's Stronghold is villainous, I think that's a heroic application. So, Volrath's Stronghold is one that I pretty immediately determined was too powerful slash unfun for Spooky Cube. I also floated it for 30 to 50 feral hogs, and a friend of mine kind of just pointed out how it just plays too awful, and Razor Swine is like the ideal top deck in a lot of situations anywhere in the game. So ended up talking me off of that one, but I still just have this Volrath Stronghold. So this is where we're gonna try to seed it with some hopefully reasonable things to do with it. And ready for a big brain play as I smash my head into my desk. If you want to dredge every turn and you already have a Narcomoeba in your graveyard, stronghold that bad boy up top. Keep dredging over that Narcomoeba. That's just good value. Some nice lands with this kind of package. Cephalid Coliseum, another classic land for dredging. Really good with Life from the Loam. You'll get through your deck really quickly with Cephalid Coliseum. We're also just going to need some lands in this cube to cast your spells in this desert cube. Dredgert. Patent trademark on Dredgert. That's the term for the cube. Cephalid Coliseum, though, really nice. The damage also kind of balances a little bit, but not really. It's still a broken card. Tranquil Thicket, another sweet one's Life from the Loam. A cycler, keep getting this back with the Loam. You can then cycle it and keep dredging. So really nice card for that kind of engine. And then it's like modest value with Crucible. Cycle it and just play it. Ristorm Portal. This is another classic card for. This is more of a lands deck thing than Dredge, but another Life from the Loam deck. This is one that plays with Bazaar and with Workshop. An aspect of those cards, a drawback is that they don't just tap for a normal amount of mana to cast spells. Like the Bazaar doesn't tap for mana at all. Workshop only taps for 3 colorless to cast artifacts. So the Restore and Portal, if you can get this into your graveyard by milling, by discarding, then those lands can now be used to tap for a green or white. And I think I want to have multiple ways to try to turn them into functional lands. This is the coolest one. We're getting some lands into our desert cube, our dredge cert cube, and this one just kind of plays great in this space. And there's going to be some other lands too that are really going to incentivize putting a Riftstone Portal in your deck. So this is a non-negotiable, really cool old frame card that plays in this space. And kind of some weirder ones or stronger ones. Tomb Fortress. I also, once upon a time, did buy all 4 Warhammer Commander decks, but I own very few of those cards anymore. And that's actually like part of why I make myself live with the Final Fantasy Commander deck bulks, because that was not the first time that I bought a bunch of Commander decks and didn't have use for most of the cards. But this is a sweet one that it's a land that you can use both to self-mill and to reanimate. So that really plays in the space with our Laboratory Maniac, with our dredgers. So cool one here. Again, we need lands in our desert cube, so Tomb Fortress really plays here. Really black intensive, really mana intensive. So I think that this one is modest enough and pretty cool. I think it's generally a lot weaker than Volrath's Stronghold, but it also does something kind of different, like actually putting the creature into play, which can be more appealing for like the really expensive creatures, the 7 and 8 mana stuff. And then Shifting Woodland. I mean, it's a Modern Horizons 3 card. You're not going to see very many Modern Horizons 3 cards in this cube, but when the stuff that you're copying is a little bit more modest, I mean, Shifting Woodland becoming a copy of Laboratory Maniac. Again, I think you're the hero if you do that. So I'm sympathetic to Shifting Woodland in this context. I'm going to try to make it so Shifting Woodland is something that's like reasonable to do. And then there's going to be strong stuff too, like if you churn through or lose access to your Yawgmoth's Bargain, if that ends up in your graveyard, like Shifting Woodland becoming a copy of Bargain could be really powerful. There's going to be some other strong like artifacts and enchantments in that space. There's going to be stuff to do with this. Again, we need some lands. I think that this is a cool one. I had a copy. This is like pretty firmly not strong enough for a 180 card vintage cube. It does show up in the digital powered cube, so I get that this is a strong card, but in general, we're trying to just make this something where we play with a lot of sweet, largely older cards, and Shifting Woodland is kind of putting the shine on those cards and showing up as an aspect. I mean, really good with Life from the Loam. Like, you're going to have very high access to the Shifting Woodland in a Life from the Loam deck, but again, like that's really making Life from the Loam the hero. And it is important to have some cards that really do play when you're aggressively milling your entire deck. Like, I don't want you to just mill your deck and just draw from an empty library and lose, you know? So you have to give some incentives to actually do this. And Shifting Woodland seems like a pretty accessible, easy way to do that. And in a lot of games, is going to be a land that enters tapped, is a land that's not going to be that appealing, but it could be really appealing if you do pursue it and actually like draft the dredge deck and really go fully into it. And I want to reward players doing that, because when it comes to a desert cube and you have to draft your lands, like, it's a really intimidating concept, and a lot of drafters like approach the draft really scared. Like, am I going to get enough mana fixing lands? And so actually getting like a full on dredge deck and navigating that and having cool packages, I could conceive that I have too much stuff here, that this is maybe on the strong side, but I do want to kind of start here and then peel it back if it's too strong, because the more familiar cube experience is Bazaar of Baghdad goes 15th and nobody plays it. So we're trying to put some shine on that card. That's the whole premise of the leftovers. And so these are the Graveyard Matters cards that we're going to be trying out. This isn't everything I have set aside that plays in the graveyard. When it comes to stuff that plays in two spaces, I think my next video is going to be about interaction. So I could have talked about like these cards on that video, but I got to break it up a little bit. And, I did want to highlight discard outlets being an essential part of the redundancy for a dredge deck. But anyway, that's some dredge stuff. The cube is coming along here. Appreciate you watching. If you don't listen to my podcast, I podcast about Cube every week. Those go live Monday. That's 180 MTG. If you like what you're seeing here, check out that podcast. Also, I appreciate likes, comments, shares, reviews, whatever. Subscribe. And I'm on Patreon now. Patreon.com/180MTG. It's kind of tied to the podcast, but it's all stuff coming from me. So thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back next time talking to some more Cube. Later, gamers.